If you're at the point where giving up feels easier than holding on, stop for a moment. Not because things are about to magically improve, but because what you're feeling right now is not failure. It's the moment before clarity, the moment before the guidance you've needed all along finally makes sense. Don't scroll, don't rush. Stay here. This might be the message that arrives right before you walk away from yourself. There is a moment right before giving up that feels heavier than everything that came before it. It's quieter than the breakdowns, colder than the fear, and more exhausting than the battles you already survived. In that moment, you don't feel dramatic pain anymore. You feel empty. You feel like you've tried everything, prayed every prayer, stayed strong longer than you should have, and still ended up here. But what if that moment isn't a sign that you're done? What if it's the moment everything you needed has finally caught up to you? What if the guidance you've been searching for all along isn't ahead of you, but already within you, waiting for you to stop running long enough to hear it? Most people quit, not because they are weak, but because they are tired of being strong without results. You stayed patient while others walked away. You stayed quiet while being misunderstood. You kept showing up even when nothing changed. That kind of endurance rewires a person. It builds something deeper than motivation. It builds discernment, and discernment doesn't shout, it whispers. The reason this season feels confusing is because the guidance you needed was never meant to come from outside voices, opinions, or reassurance. It was meant to rise from the pressure itself, shaped by every disappointment you didn't let destroy you. You didn't come this far by accident. Every delay, every closed door, every unanswered question was teaching you how to stand without applause, how to trust without proof, how to remain grounded when nothing felt secure. You may think you've lost direction, but in truth, you've outgrown the guidance that once worked for you. What guided you before can't guide who you are becoming, and that's why everything feels unfamiliar. Growth always begins with disorientation, not clarity. There is a wisdom that only reveals itself when you are stripped of certainty, when plans fail, when timelines collapse, when your old ways of coping no longer work. That wisdom doesn't come from trying harder. It comes from listening differently. The guidance you needed all along wasn't loud, urgent, or forceful. It was patient, observant, calm. It watched how you responded to pain. It noticed who you became when no one was watching. And now, it's ready to lead. If you stop mistaking exhaustion for failure, giving up feels tempting because rest has been misunderstood. You don't need to quit. You need to realign. You don't need to disappear. You need to pause without shame. The strength you're searching for isn't new strength. It's the same strength that carried you through everything you thought would break you. The difference now is that you're being asked to move with wisdom, not force, with trust, not urgency, with discernment, not desperation. So before you give up, stay here for a moment, breathe here, listen here, because the guidance you needed all along is closer than you think. It's been forming quietly through every loss, every delay, every lonely victory. And in the next moments, you're going to recognize it, not as something that saves you from pain, but as something that teaches you how to walk through it without losing yourself. There comes a season when guidance stops sounding like answers and starts feeling like silence. And silence can feel cruel when you're already tired. You replay conversations in your mind. You search for signs. You wait for clarity to strike like lightning. But it doesn't. Instead, everything goes quiet. Not because you've been abandoned, but because noise was keeping you dependent. The silence wasn't punishment. It was preparation. It was removing the distractions that kept you from trusting your own perception. You were used to being guided by reactions, approval, rejection, progress, feedback. But real discernment is born when those signals disappear, when there's no applause to motivate you, no urgency to impress anyone, no external pressure telling you who to be. That's when the internal compass activates. And at first, it feels uncomfortable. You doubt yourself, you second-guess every instinct. But slowly something changes. You stop asking, "What should I do?" and start asking, "What aligns with who I've become?" Silence exposes truth. It reveals which desires were rooted in fear and which were rooted in purpose. It shows you how much of your movement was driven by anxiety rather than intention. When everything went quiet, it forced you to sit with yourself, not the version you present to others, but the version that exists when no one is asking anything of you. That version holds the guidance you've been ignoring because it doesn't beg, rush, or argue. It waits. The reason you felt lost wasn't because you lacked direction. It was because your old direction expired. You were trying to navigate a new season with outdated instincts. What once felt right now feels heavy. What once excited you now drains you. That's not failure, that's evolution. Guidance doesn't always tell you where to go next. Sometimes it tells you what no longer fits through discomfort, restlessness, and emotional resistance. You've been mistaking emotional heaviness for weakness when it's actually discernment sharpening itself. When something inside you says, "This isn't it anymore," that's not negativity. That's wisdom forming boundaries. Growth requires subtraction. Silence creates the space for that subtraction to become visible. You're not confused. You're becoming selective, and selectivity feels lonely before it feels empowering. So if everything feels quiet right now, don't rush to fill it. Don't distract yourself into numbness. Don't interpret stillness as stagnation. The silence is teaching you how to listen inwardly instead of searching outwardly. The guidance you needed all along isn't coming to rescue you. It's coming to mature you. And once you recognize it, you'll never need external validation the same way again. There was a time when you trusted your inner voice without hesitation, before doubt crept in, before disappointment taught you to question your instincts, before being misunderstood made you second-guess your truth. That voice didn't disappear. It just went quiet after being ignored too many times. Not because it was wrong, but because you kept choosing what felt safer, more acceptable, or less disruptive. You were conditioned to believe that certainty comes from logic, reassurance, or evidence. But the deepest guidance rarely arrives that way. It comes as a calm knowing that doesn't argue with fear. It simply doesn't obey it. It speaks without urgency, without panic. And because of that, it's often mistaken for indifference or passivity. But that voice is steady because it's rooted in truth, not emotion. Every time you ignored that inner signal, it didn't punish you, it observed. It noticed how your body reacted when you said yes to what felt wrong. It noticed the heaviness that followed choices made to please others. It noticed how peace left quietly, without drama. That's why now, when something isn't aligned, your body knows before your mind does. You've been searching for signs outside yourself while dismissing the ones inside, but the most accurate guidance you'll ever receive is the one that feels calm, grounded, and non-negotiable. When something is meant for you, it doesn't require self-betrayal to obtain it. And when something isn't meant for you anymore, your spirit withdraws long before your mind catches up. You've been measuring strength the wrong way. You thought strength meant pushing through pain without pause. But real strength doesn't announce itself. It adapts quietly. It learns when to soften and when to stand firm. And the strength you carry now is the grounded kind that comes from surviving things you never speak about. You underestimate yourself because your strength didn't look dramatic. It showed up in restraint, in silence, in walking away from what drained you. That kind of strength doesn't feel powerful while you're building it. It feels lonely. You didn't lose your fire. You learned how to contain it. You conserve, you protect. You observe before you engage. That shift may feel like weakness to people who only understand chaos, but it's mastery. Strength looks like no longer explaining yourself, like letting go without closure, like choosing peace over vindication. And that's why this season feels unfamiliar. You're operating from self-respect instead of survival. Letting go doesn't feel like relief at first. It feels like loss layered with doubt. But what you're releasing now is not your future. It's your attachment to how you thought that future had to look. You held on because you believed endurance would eventually be rewarded. But patience that requires self-erasure is not virtue. The guidance you needed all along is teaching you when loyalty turns into self-abandonment, growth's closure, like choosing peace over vindication. And that's why this season feels unfamiliar. You're operating from self-respect instead of survival. Letting go doesn't feel like relief at first. It feels like loss layered with doubt. But what you're releasing now is not your future. It's your attachment to how you thought that future had to look. You held on because you believed endurance would eventually be rewarded. But patience that requires self-erasure is not virtue. The guidance you needed all along is teaching you when loyalty turns into self-abandonment. Growth sometimes means walking away without being understood. And that can feel unbearable if your worth has been tied to being seen correctly. But clarity doesn't require agreement. You're not closing doors in anger. You're closing them in clarity. Guidance settles. It doesn't rush. Peace is not passive. It's chosen, protected, maintained. And sometimes it demands endings that feel abrupt to others, but overdue to your spirit. There comes a moment when giving up and letting go no longer feel the same. Giving up feels heavy. Letting go feels clear. And the moment you're in now is not about quitting. It's about releasing the belief that suffering is the price of becoming. Guidance sometimes arrives as permission to rest, permission to stop forcing, permission to change your mind. You see more by reacting less. You hear more by speaking less. Awareness slows you down so every step is aligned. Nothing you endured was wasted. Every delay trained your discernment. Every disappointment refined your boundaries. You don't need to rush into the next chapter. You're already standing in it. So don't give up. Give in.
Give in to clarity. Give in to peace. Give in to the guidance that's been forming inside you all along. You're not starting over. You're starting aligned. And that changes everything.